everyone, welcome to my channel. This is the part 2 of clinical anatomy of lower limb. In part 1, we have seen the clinical correlation of front of thigh, medial side of the thigh, back of thigh, gluteal region, hip joint and popliteal fossa. The remaining parts are covered in this video. So first we will see the clinical anatomy of knee joint, and here's the meniscal tear. The injuries to menisci are commonly caused by the twisting strains in a slightly flexed knee, as in kicking a football. The meniscus may get separated from the capsule, or it may be torn longitudinally, that is buccal handle tear, or transversely. So it's longitudinal or transverse, or you can say buccal handle or transverse. Now the medial meniscus is more prone to injury than the lateral because of its firm fixity to the tibial collateral ligament and greater excursion during the rotatory movements. The lateral meniscus is protected by the popliteal muscle because its medial fibers pulls the posterior horn of the meniscus backwards so that it is not crushed between the articular surfaces. Now the pain on the medial rotation of tibia on the femur indicates the injury of medial meniscus, and if the pain is on lateral rotation of tibia on the femur, then that will indicate injury of the lateral meniscus. So here in the diagram there is lateral meniscal tear shown. How can I understand that this is lateral meniscal tear? By seeing the shape. So medial meniscus is nearly semilunar and it is wider in the front, whereas lateral meniscus is nearly circular. So in the picture, as you can see, the circular one is torn, so that is lateral meniscus is torn, as well as it is on the lateral side or fibular side. Moving on to the injury of the cruciate ligaments. What are cruciate ligaments? These are two thick, strong fibrous bands which act as direct bond of union between the femur and tibia. They are present inside the knee joint. They represent the collateral ligaments of the primitive femorotibial joint, and they maintain the anteroposterior stability of the knee joint. So normally the anterior cruciate ligament is damaged than the posterior cruciate ligament. The anterior cruciate ligament is injured in anterior dislocation of tibia, whereas posterior ligament is injured in posterior dislocation of tibia. Tear of the cruciate ligaments lead to abnormal anteroposterior mobility. If the anterior cruciate ligament is torn, the tibia is pulled excessively forward on the femur, and that is anterior drawer sign. And if the posterior cruciate ligament is torn, the tibia is pulled excessively backwards, that is posterior drawer sign. So as you can see in the picture, here there is posterior cruciate ligamental tear and there will be posterior drawer sign. In this another picture, you can see the anterior cruciate ligamental tear and there will be anterior drawer sign. Moving on to other applied aspects of knee joint, first one is arthroscopy of the knee joint. It is an endoscopic examination or visualization of the interior of the knee joint cavity with minimal disruption of the tissues. The ligament tear or replacement can also be performed by using an arthroscope. So this is an arthroscope here in the picture. Next is knee replacement. If the knee joint is badly damaged by the osteoarthritis, an artificial joint consisting of plastic tibial component and metal femoral component is connected to the tibial and femoral bone ends after removal of the damaged areas. And there's also something called as unhappy triad of the knee joint. A combination of injury of the tibial collateral ligament, medial meniscus and anterior cruciate ligament is called as unhappy triad of the knee joint. So we are done with the knee joint. Moving on to the applied anatomy of the front of leg. The first one is anterior tibial compartment syndrome or shin splints or the Fresher syndrome. Now it occurs due to overextension of the muscles of the anterior compartment, especially when the untrained person who lead a sedentary life are asked to run or walk for long distances. Now shin splints also occur in trained runners who do not warm up. The muscle of the compartment swells within a tight compartment due to sudden overuse, which may impede venous return, leading to accumulation of fluid inside the compartment with unyielding walls. The pressure tends to compress the anterior tibial artery and the reducing blood supply to the muscles, leading to ischemia and pain. It is frequently seen in freshers, as in medical freshers, who are made to run excessively. Hence, this is also referred to as freshers syndrome. Then there is overactivity of inverter and everter muscles. One, we have talipes varus. Following an injury to superficial peroneal nerve, the paralysis of the peroneal muscles and associated overactivity of the inverter muscles, that is anterior tibial muscles of the foot, produces a deformity, that is talipes varus. Second is talipes valgus. The overactivity of the peroneal muscles following the paralysis of the anterior tibial muscles or the inverters of the foot produces this talipes valgus. So you can see here the picture. In talipes varus, there is excessive inversion because of the paralysis of everters, whereas in talipes valgus, there is excessive eversion because of the paralysis of inverters. The next is anserine bursitis. Repeated trauma on the upper part of the medial aspect of the tibia causes inflammation of the anserine bursa, that is anserine bursitis, which causes pain and swelling at this site. So you can see the bursa in the knee joint, the suprapatellar bursa, prepatellar bursa, infrapatellar bursa, and there is pes anserine bursa. This pes anserine bursa is present in upper medial aspect of tibia, and repeated trauma to this causes bursitis. Next, we are moving to the clinical anatomy of the back of the leg. Tendon grafting. The plantaris is a vestigial muscle in the human beings and is absent in 5 to 10% of the people. It has insignificant role either as flexor of the knee or as plantar flexor of the ankle. Hence, the tendon of plantaris is used for grafting. For example, in reconstructive surgery of the tendons of the hand. So you can see here, this is your plantaris muscle and the long tendon down here, and this is how this long tendon is removed and used in the surgery, replacing the tendons of hand. Another clinical anatomy part in the back of the leg is tennis leg. It is painful calf injury in which there is tear or strain of the medial head of gastrocnemius at its musculotendinous junction due to overstretching. And it commonly occurs in tennis player who stretches their gastrocnemius too much for a difficult serve. Moving on to the ankle joint. First is ankle sprains. The excessive stretching and or tearing of the ligaments of the ankle joint is called ankle sprain. The ankle sprains are usually caused by the falls from a height or twist of the ankle. When the plantar flexed foot is excessively inverted, the anterior and posterior talofibular and calcaneofibular ligaments are stretched and torn. The anterior talofibular ligament is most commonly torn. So you can see this white thing here, these are your ligaments here, and as you can see the foot is twisted this way, there is an ankle sprain. When the plantar flexed foot is excessively everted, the deltoid ligament are not torn. Why is it not torn? Because it's very strong, and instead there is an avulsion fracture of the medial malleolus. The inversion sprains are more common than the eversion sprains. Next we have is the dislocation of the ankle. The dislocations of ankle joint are rare because it is very stable joint due to tibiofibular mortise. However, whenever dislocation occurs, it is always accompanied by the fracture of one of the malleoli. So here is this X-ray. You can see a normal one and a fracture. You think that there is dislocation of the ankle joint when there is the fracture of the fibula or tibia. Moving on to the applied anatomy of the arches supporting the foot. First is flat foot, also called as pes planus. The flat foot is commonest of all foot problems. It occurs due to the collapse of the medial longitudinal arch. So here you can see this is collapsed. During long periods of standing, the plantar aponeurosis and spring ligaments are overstretched. As a result, the support of the head of the talus is lost and is pushed downwards between calcaneus and navicular bones. This leads to flattening of the medial longitudinal arch with lateral deviation of the foot. Now there are some effects of the person usually has clumsy shuffling gait due to loss of spring in the foot. It makes the foot more liable to trauma due to loss of shock absorbing function. The compression of the nerves and vessels of the sole is due to the loss of concavity of the sole. Then the compression of the communication between medial and lateral plantar nerves leading to neuralgic pain in the forefoot, and this is metatarsalgia. Moving on to another deformity, that is high arched foot or pes cavis. The exaggeration of the longitudinal arch of the foot causes pes cavis, and this usually occurs because of contracture or plantar flexion at the transverse tarsal joint. When the patient walks with a high arched foot, there is dorsiflexion of the metatarsophalangeal joints and the plantar flexion of the interphalangeal joints at the toes. Next is clubfoot or talipes. Talipes is a Latin word for clubfoot. Now this clubfoot may be congenital or acquired, and there are 5 types. Talipes equinus or horseshoe-like. In this condition, the foot is plantarflex and the person walks on the toes with heels raised. Talipes calcaneus. In this condition, the person walks on the heel with the forefoot raised. Talipes veris. In this condition, the foot is inverted and adducted. The person walks on the outer border of the foot. Talipes valgus. In this condition, the foot is everted and abducted. The person walks on the inner border of his foot. Talipes equinovarus. Now it is commonest deformity of the foot. In this condition, the foot is inverted, adducted and plantarflexed. Moving on to hallux valgus and hammer toe. Hallux valgus. In this condition, the big toe is deviated laterally at the metatarsophalangeal joint. It usually occurs due to constant wearing of pointed shoes with high heel. The head of the first metatarsal bone becomes prominent and rubs on the shoe, and this leads to a formation of a protective adventitious bursa called bunion on the medial side of the big toe. Next is hammer toe. It is a deformity of the toe in which both metatarsophalangeal and distal interphalangeal joints are hyperextended, but the proximal interphalangeal joints are acutely flexed. And this deformity usually affects the second and the third toes. Moving on to the clinical anatomy of the venous drainage of the lower limb. First is venesection of the great saphenous vein. The great saphenous vein in front of the medial malleolus at ankle is the most preferred site of venesection or cut down in emergency situations when the superficial veins elsewhere in the body are collapsed and invisible, to insert the cannula for prolonged administration of IV fluids. Now note that in front of the medial malleolus, saphenous nerves lies in front of the vein. However, during cut down procedure, the saphenous nerve should be recognized to avoid its injury. Then we have the graft, the great saphenous vein graft. In coronary bypass surgery, to relieve the ischemia of the heart, a segment of the great saphenous vein is removed and used for aortocoronary grafting to bypass an arterial obstruction. Due to the presence of the valves, the vein has to be reversed so that its valves do not obstruct the blood flow. Then we have calf pump and peripheral heart. In upright position, the venous return from lower limb occurs against gravity and depends mainly on the contraction of the calf muscles, and therefore these muscles are termed as calf muscles or calf pump. So you can see this as the muscle is relaxed. Here the valves are closed, but when the muscle contracts, the upper valves open, letting the lower valves closed, and hence the blood moves towards the heart. Then peripheral heart. The soleus muscle contains venous sinuses filled with blood. When the soleus muscle contracts, it pumps the blood from its large venous sinuses into the deep veins, and when it is relaxed, it sucks the blood from the superficial veins and the venous sinuses within it are refilled. The unidirectional flow is maintained by the valves in the perforating veins. Hence, the soleus is sometimes referred to as peripheral heart. The soleal sinuses are common site for thrombosis and source of pulmonary embolism in sedentary individuals. The phlebitis of the soleal sinus may be dangerous because the spread of the infection from here may damage the valves in the perforators. Next is deep vein thrombosis. The veins of the lower limb possess valves which direct the blood flow to the heart, particularly against gravity in upright posture. The valves are more numerous in the deep veins than in the superficial veins. The veins from the muscle draining into the deep veins have valves except those in soleus, which are arranged in form of the venous sinuses. The blood flow is sluggish in soleal sinuses, particularly when the muscles are put to rest. Prolonged rest in bed by some patients after injury is unwise because it may develop deep vein thrombosis, which may culminate into life-threatening complication of the pulmonary embolism. Next is varicose veins. When the veins become dilated and tortuous, they are called varicose veins. As you can see here, this is a varicose vein. The superficial veins of the lower limb commonly become varicosed due to incompetency of the valves following prolonged sanding, let's say by bus conductors, traffic police personnel and nurses. Now this could be because of incompetency of the valves in perforating veins or incompetency of the valves at the termination of the superficial veins. For example, the saphenofemoral valve. Then we have to recognize the sites of these incompetent valves. The clinicians recognize these sites of the incompetent valves by the following two tests: Trendelenburg's test and Perthes test or Tourniquet test. Now here you can see this is Trendelenburg's test and not Trendelenburg's sign. Trendelenburg's sign was the one where you used to see the lurching and waddling gait and the sagging of the pelvis on the healthy side when the foot is off the ground, when the gluteus medius and minimus is paralyzed on the opposite side. But now in the recognition of sites of incompetent valves, we are seeing Trendelenburg's test. So the patient is asked to lie down and the veins are emptied by raising the lower limb and stroking the varicose veins proximally. Now the pressure is applied with a thumb at the saphenofemoral junction and the patient is asked to stand up quickly. Now to test the superficial veins, the pressure is released. If the varicose veins are filled quickly from above, it indicates incompetency of the superficial veins and the test is positive. If veins are not filled, the test is negative. To test the perforating veins, the pressure at the saphenofemoral junction is not released but maintained for about a minute. Now gradual filling of the superficial veins even after maintaining the pressure at the saphenofemoral junction, indicates incompetency of the veins of the perforating veins, allowing the blood from deep to superficial veins, and the test is positive. Next is Perthes test or Tourniquet test. Now it is employed to test the incompetence of the deep veins. A tourniquet is tied around the upper part of the thigh, tight enough to occlude the saphenous vein but not the femoral vein. The patient is asked to do gentle exercise, that is, walk quickly for a while with tourniquet in this place. If the perforating and deep veins are normal, the varicose veins will shrink, whereas if they are blocked, the varicose veins become more distended. Next is the applied anatomy of the lymph nodes and lymphatics. First is elephantiasis. The lymph vessels of the lower limb are often blocked, particularly in endemic areas, by microfilarial parasites Wuchereria branckofti. This causes massive edema of the lower limb, producing a clinical condition called elephantiasis, and in this condition there is hypertrophy of the skin and subcutaneous tissue to an unusual proportion. Next is enlargement of inguinal lymph nodes. It is commonest cause of swelling in the subinguinal region. The common causes of enlargement of these lymph nodes is infection, boil or abscess in the drainage area. Other causes are filariasis, Hodgkin's disease, etc. The enlarged inguinal nodes should be differentiated from the ectopic testes, femoral hernia and psoas abscess occurring in the nearby areas. Now we are going to see the clinical aspects of the innervation of the lower limb. So first is femoral nerve. Injury to the femoral nerve. It is rare but may be injured by a stab, gunshot wounds or a pelvis fracture. Clinical features. First we will see the motor loss. Weak flexion of the thigh due to paralysis of iliacus and sartorius. Then inability to extend the knee due to paralysis of quadriceps femoris. And then there is paralysis of pectineus leading to the absence of flexion and adduction of the hip. Not exactly absence, but you can see the weak flexion and adduction of the hip. Next is sensory loss. Sensory loss over the anterior and medial aspects of the thigh due to involvement of the intermediate and medial cutaneous nerves of the thigh. Sensory loss on the medial side of the leg and foot up to the ball of the great toe, that is first metatarsophalangeal joint, due to involvement of the saphenous nerve. Then we have femoral nerve neuropathy. The main trunk of the femoral nerve is not subject to an entrapment in neuropathy, but it may be compressed by retroperitoneal tumors. A localized neuropathy of the femoral nerve may occur in diabetes mellitus, and the following are characteristic features like the wasting and weakness of quadriceps leading to the considerable difficulty in walking, and pain and paresthesia on the anterior and medial aspects of thigh. Next is obturator nerve. Effects of injury to the obturator nerve. Now it may be injured in anterior dislocation of the hip joint or during radical retropubic prostatectomy. Clinical features. Motor loss. There is loss of adduction of the thigh due to paralysis of adductor muscles of the thigh. And in sensory loss, you have loss of medial aspects of the thigh due to involvement of the cutaneous branch of the anterior division of the obturator nerve. Then we have obturator nerve neuropathy, the syndrome of an obturator nerve entrapment causing the medial thigh pain, and is described in athletes with large adductor muscles. Surgical division of the obturator nerve. It is done sometimes to relieve the spasm of adductor muscles in the spastic paralysis. Irritation of the obturator nerve. The inflammation of the ovary causes localized peritonitis in the region of ovarian fossa, which may cause irritation of the obturator nerve. In such cases, the pain may be referred to the hip, knee and medial side of the thigh. And then there is referred pain. In diseases of the hip joint, the pain may be referred to medial side of the thigh. Moving on to the sciatic nerve. Effects of injury to the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve may be injured by penetrating wounds, posterior dislocation of the hip, fracture of the pelvis, total hip replacement surgery in 1% cases of these people, or misplaced therapeutic injection in the gluteal region. This is the most common cause, the misplaced injection. Like you know that we have seen in the part 1 that the intramuscular injection given in gluteal region, the safest area to give that is upper lateral corner, and there is sciatic nerve below there. In the lower medial corner there is sciatic nerve. So misplace of the giving injection will be a most common cause causing the injury of sciatic nerve. Clinical features: motor loss. You can see inability to extend the thigh and flex the knee due to the paralysis of hamstring muscles, loss of all movements below the knee due to the paralysis of all the muscles of leg and foot, and motor loss leads to flail foot, which leads to great difficulty in walking. The person walks with high stepping gait. Next is sensory loss. Sensory loss on the back of the thigh, whole of the leg and foot except the area innervated by the saphenous nerve due to involvement of the cutaneous nerves derived from the tibial and common peroneal nerves. Then we have sciatic nerve neuropathy. As sciatic nerve leaves the pelvis, sometimes it passes through the piriformis muscle and at points it becomes entrapped, leading to piriformis syndrome. And we have seen the piriformis syndrome in the part 1 of this topic. Then we have sciatica. It is a term applied to a clinical condition characterized by shooting pain felt along the course of the distribution of the sciatic nerve. It occurs due to compression and irritation of L4-S3 spinal nerve roots by herniated intervertebral disc of the lumbar vertebrae. Then we have tibial nerve. Effects of injury to the tibial nerve. Now it may be injured by a lacerated wound in the popliteal fossa or posterior dislocation of the knee joint. Clinical features: motor loss. Foot is held dorsiflexed and everted due to paralysis of muscles of posterior compartment of leg. Loss of prominence of calf and tendocalcaneus due to paralysis of triceps surae muscles, that is gastrocnemius and soleus together. Then there is loss of plantar flexion of the foot due to paralysis of the flexures of the ankle, and there is inability to stand on the toes due to the loss of plantar flexion of the foot. Then there is sensory loss, the loss of the sensation in the sole and plantar aspects of the toe, including the dorsal aspects of their distal phalanges due to involvement of cutaneous branches. Then we have tarsal tunnel syndrome. It occurs due to compression of the tibial nerve in the osteofibrous tunnel under the flexor retinaculum of the ankle. It usually appears or presents as pain and paresthesia in the sole of the foot, which often becomes worse at night. Then we have Mortell's metatarsalgia, also called as plantar digital neuroma. It occurs due to the formation of neuroma following pressure on one of the plantar digital nerves just prior to its bifurcation at one of the toe clefts. Now, it most commonly affects the plantar digital nerve running between the third and fourth metatarsal heads to the third web space. It clinically presents as intermittent pain in the plantar aspect of the forefoot, usually between the third and fourth metatarsals. Then we have peroneal nerve. Effects of injury to the common peroneal nerve. The common peroneal nerve is extremely vulnerable to injury as it winds around the posterolateral aspect of the neck of the fibula. At this site, it may be injured by direct trauma, fracture of neck of fibula, or tightly applied plaster cast. Clinical features: you can see motor loss, there is foot drop due to the paralysis of muscles of anterior compartment of leg, that are dorsiflexors of the leg, and there is foot inversion because there is loss of eversion of the foot due to paralysis of peroneus longus and peroneus brevis. These are everters of the foot. Then there is loss of extension of toes due to paralysis of extensor digitorum longus and extensor hallucis longus. Sensory loss. The sensory loss due to involvement of the cutaneous branches on the anterolateral aspect of the leg and the whole of the dorsum of the foot except the areas supplied by the saphenous and sural nerves. Then we are seeing the injury to the superficial peroneal nerve. This injury of superficial peroneal nerve leads to loss of eversion of the foot due to paralysis of peroneus longus and brevis muscles. Then there is sensory loss on the lateral aspect of the leg, sensory loss on the dorsum of the foot except for the web space between the first and second toe and dorsal aspect of all the toes, which is supplied by deep peroneal nerve. Moving on, we have the last one here, that is Borger's disease. It is an obliterative disorder of the lower limb arteries distal to the knee. It typically occurs in young male smokers. It presents as intermittent claudication, digital ischemia and loss of ankle pulses. Where can we feel the ankle pulse? That is dorsalis pedis artery. So you have to feel the dorsalis pedis artery pulse. If it is absent, then there is the chances of Buerger's disease or Borger's disease. The progressive ischemia of digits may eventually require amputation of the foot, and the treatment includes stopping the smoking and sympathectomy. The sympathetic denervation of the lower limb is achieved by removing second, third and fourth lumbar ganglia with the intermediate chain, that is lumbar sympathectomy. Ectomy is removal. It is important to note that the first lumbar ganglion is preserved because it controls the internal urethral sphincter, and its inadvertent removal leads to dry coitus. So thank you for this. Please like and share this video and subscribe to my channel for more such videos. Thank you.